Oregon pulled in a top 5 national recruiting class in 2024. Is that going to be the standard in the Big Ten? Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Got my guy Max Torres here joining me on today's show. Ducks Dish Podcast covers the Ducks for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated, Ducks Digest, lead editor and publisher. You guys know him well enough by now. Let's get right into it, Max. A top 5 class, the best ever for Oregon nationally, both in overall rating and national ranking compared to the rest of the country. The only schools that out-recruited Oregon in the 2024 cycle are Alabama and Georgia. And Julian Sayin, by the way, is factored into those calculations, and he transferred to Ohio State. So he's not actually, a part of that Alabama class. So Oregon might, by ranking, if you were to take him out, have the number 2 class. I don't know. Look at it whichever way you want. But is that the expectation? Is that the norm for the Ducks now? Or is this just a very, very good cycle?
I think it is becoming the norm for Oregon, Spencer, and that's not something that we necessarily said before Dan Lanning got hired. Mario Cristobal set the bar before Dan Lanning did make some history this past cycle. I think the Ducks were at 6 or 7, so still really good. But I think Oregon is uniquely positioned in today's era of college football to pull in top 5 classes on a more consistent basis. They have the brand, they have the head coach, they're doing it on the field, and they have the coaching and recruiting staff. I think those guys definitely deserve a shout out. Marshall Malco and the rest of the people in the recruiting and personnel department, they do a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes, and I really feel like they are pushing all the right buttons right now. I think that as we get closer to April, we could see Oregon going on a recruiting run, more specifically in the 2025 class. But they did the work in 2024, and while they were doing that, they were getting a head start on some of these 2025s that are at the forefront of their thinking. So if they keep doing what they're doing and they keep winning, I think that they're going to be in that top 5 more regularly.
Yeah, Lanning having won 22 games in his first couple of years certainly doesn't hurt, but the work really gets put in before the results are on the field. It's a chicken or the egg problem, right? Do you win well and then get big-time recruits, or do you get big-time recruits and then you start winning? I think they both really feed off of one another, and Oregon is in a really good position to enjoy the fruits of their labor on both fronts, frankly, and that's been playing out recently. But if Oregon's going to keep recruiting at top 5 level like that, there are some heavy hitters out there. Georgia, Alabama probably pulls back a bit in recruiting with Kalen DeBoer while he kind of establishes himself in that geographical footprint, and his staff gets settled as well. They've got some good recruiters on staff. Jamarcus Shepard, most notably the former receivers coach and now their co-offensive coordinator down there in Tuscaloosa. But with Alabama out of the fold, I think that kind of opens the door for someone to walk in and, take that perennial top 5 spot. I think Oregon's capable of doing that. But certainly you look at teams like Texas, or you look at, what Billy Napier's even done recruiting at Florida, or Mike Norvell at Florida State, or, Notre Dame can recruit very well. There are a lot of teams out there that are going to recruit at a high level every season. How does Oregon stand out among them?
Oregon is right in that territory. I think the only difference that I can really see, or maybe one of the main ones is the better way to put it, between Oregon and some of these other schools is you haven't seen them as, consistently inside that top 5 territory, signing, 3, 4, 5 stars. Oregon's kind of been in that 1 to 2 range lately. They got Elijah Rushing and Gatlin Bear in 2024, but we all know that Bear's going on his mission. So it'll be a little while before we get to see how he actually pans out in Eugene and gets things going. But those Georgia, Ohio State, names, they are consistently in the mix for a lot of these top guys. And Oregon's in that conversation as well. It just they haven't necessarily been able to close it with some of these guys, particularly in the Southeast, but they are doing what they can to try to push more into that blueprint. Obviously signed Jaquan McRoy out of Alabama in the 24 class, just a behemoth of a human being, that offensive tackle. And then they extended a recent offer to Mario Nash Jr., who was the Under Armour offensive line MVP in Atlanta, and he's really liking the Ducks. So they're putting in the work in that region, but I think it's going to take a little bit more time of getting guys on a more regular basis from those areas. And I think that they are doing everything they can to recruit nationally. That's obviously one of the biggest priorities that they have. You can't contend for a national championship if you're just signing guys from Oregon or even the West Coast for that matter. That's why you see Oregon pushing into Texas, into the DMV more regularly, and even out into Florida with guys like Dallas Wilson and Adrian Wilson. So I don't think there's a whole lot other than maybe history separating the Ducks from the regular competitors in that top five. But if they keep doing what they're doing and stacking classes year after year, I think Dan Lanning is certainly building towards that trajectory.
One thing that can certainly elevate Oregon's brand in a big way would be winning a national championship. It would be their first, and that's what Duck fans are of course waiting and hoping for, and they'll have the chance to do that again in 2024. But here's something that's interesting. I heard this on Josh Pate's show, the Late Kick Extra podcast, which is a great listen, by the way. Highly recommend for all you college football fans out there. Oregon hasn't won a national championship, no. But how many coaches in college football have won a national championship? Like the number of schools, like you could look at that in the recruiting sense and say, well, that's something that, other schools have that Oregon doesn't, right? Georgia's got multiple national championships. They almost, had a third last season. And I agree with all of that sort of stuff. And that's certainly something that can be used, when it was Oregon and Georgia and Justin Williams, the 5-star linebacker, ended up choosing the Bulldogs. You wonder if part of the reason isn't that, well, this is a place that has proven they can win a national championship, or Oregon is unproven. Like they're a very strong pitch, but the only active coaches to win national championships are Mac Brown, Dabo Swinney, and Kirby Smart. And so with Alabama having lost Nick Saban, I think that kind of helps Oregon in that sense of, that's not something that's going to be used against them in the recruiting world. I think that Oregon's brand is so big, they can go after the biggest recruits in the country, and they don't have to worry about, well, is everyone going to see Oregon in the same way that Duck fans do?
And that's something that I think is maybe a little bit overblown in terms of just how much weight that truly carries. Winning is the best recruiting tool at the end of the day, Spencer. You're not going to get any pushback from me on that, but I don't think that Oregon's lack of a national title hinders them as much as some people might think on the outside. I think that they probably try to spin it in a more positive way. Like, hey, do you want to be the first one to do it? And I think that Oregon, with their tradition of innovation and just doing things differently, they're kind of this new age football program, right? They're not one of the more decorated programs nationally, is certainly along with the likes of your Florida States, Alabama's, Texas, Ohio States. Like they've all done it before, so they have that with them. But they are having a tremendous amount of success recently, certainly in our lifetimes. And you're having a lot of these recruits that they're going after. They're telling me they're growing up seeing the Marcus Mariotas, the DeAnthony Thomases. And before long, they'll be talking about Kayvon Thibodeau, Penei Sewell. So their recent success, I think, can really help them. And I think that being the first one to do something certainly has some intrigue and some allure that comes with it. So I think that before long, we could definitely see Oregon in that conversation. They're already in that conversation, but now we have to see what that path looks like with the first year of the 12-team playoff.
Well, the 2025 class has got some early commits, just one along the defensive side and 4 on offense, including Achilles Smith Jr., but that of course is going to change. Oregon's going to add more names in the 2025 cycle, and there are names that you Oregon fans, and myself as well, should be aware of, that Max is going to tell us about. after we talk about our friends over at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little bit further, safely, of course? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. Everything you could possibly need. Their amazing lineup at Nissan also includes the Nissan Pathfinder and the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure, wherever that may be throughout the beautiful, wonderful state of Oregon, which I'm sure will be getting more sunshine in the coming months. Shop NissanUSA.com. That's shop NissanUSA.com. Names. Recruiting classes are made up of names, but what goes into those names? How do the names get to Oregon? What are they going to bring to the table once they get to Oregon? Well, that's why we talk about recruiting so often right here on the show. So, Max, let's talk about a couple of 2025 names that Oregon's hot on the trail for. We'll start with Nasir Wyatt, 4-star edge prospect from out west, and then current LSU commit and wide receiver DeCorian Moore. Let's begin with Wyatt. What's kind of the latest on Oregon's pursuit of the highly coveted defensive lineman?
The names don't get much bigger on defense for Oregon than Nasir Wyatt out of national powerhouse Mater Dei. I put my prediction in for Oregon to land Nasir Wyatt back in November, so I've been trying to keep a close tab on this one, Spencer. But it seems like it's playing out maybe a little bit more towards the long game than I had previously thought. He is reportedly set to take some trips out to USC, Ohio State, Miami, and Tennessee. That's according to Chad Simmons of On3, who had the latest reporting there. But I still think that Oregon's done a tremendous job in this recruitment. He was recently on campus before the dead period started for a majority of February. He was supposed to take a visit out to Florida, but then Dan Lanning came by his school during the contact period and said, "Hey, man, we need you in Eugene before the dead period hits us. This is urgent." And, he's really excited about the plan that Oregon has in place for him and that defense with Tosh Lupoi. Certainly the Ducks have a lot of momentum at that position with Kayvon Thibodeau being a first-round pick and having a big impact in the NFL. And then Jordan Birch looks like he's next in line. And you also have to factor in the trio of true freshmen, Blake Purchase, Mateo Uiagalelei, and Tatum Tuioti that hit early on, or at least carved out a pretty significant role. So I still think that Oregon's done a tremendous job there with Nasir Wyatt. But you definitely want to try to get him back on campus. I would assume the plan now is sometime during those spring practices. But I got a little fired up there. I don't know if you wanted to break between him or if you wanted me to get straight into DeCorian.
Well, I did want to add on the defensive line front, it would be another feather in the cap for this staff. Like they recruit defense, I think, slightly more heavily than offense, which isn't to say that the offensive staff, Junior Adams, and especially Carlos Lachlan. I mean, Lachlan is arguably the best individual recruiter outside of Tosh Lupoi on the staff. Is that a crazy take?
No. You said Lachlan outside of Tosh?
Yeah, I mean, again,
I put Junior Adams in there too.
Yeah. Junior Adams, the other guy, the wide receivers coach, would definitely be up there on my list. But I think that, everything always starts inside out for the Ducks when they recruit defensively, and Wyatt is one of those sort of foundational pieces. And Oregon already has a 2025 defensive line commit. That's the first guy that they've added. I had Brian Smith on to talk about him a while ago on the show. His name is actually escaping me at the moment, but my good friend Max is going to look that up while I finish this particular thought, unless you know it off the top of your head better than I do, which, is why we bring you on the show, of course.
I don't off the top of my head. I'll admit I was looking at his Nasir's 247 page, so I had a little bit of a brain fart. But
no, you're good. But yeah, but I think that Matthew Johnson is his name. So
yes,
I think that adding guys like Johnson and Wyatt, and Brian Smith was very high on Matthew Johnson. Liked what he saw on his film a good amount, and I didn't think too much of his initial commitment, and Brian said, "No, I think that guy's a player. I think he's someone who comes in and plays at least a little bit as a true freshman, maybe more as time goes along." But Nasir Wyatt is one of those kind of anchor foundational pieces that could be part of just a stacked defensive line group in 2025 for the Ducks. Because I think they're going to be pretty good in 2024. And I think they could be even better in 2025 because the 3 true freshmen that played this year, they will all be juniors in that particular year. Aiden Breland will be a sophomore. You'll have lost Jordan Birch. I believe Jamari Caldwell's out of eligibility after this season.
Just
but
1 year, I think.
Yeah, what we're going to see and what we're going to talk about later in the show are the young group of defensive linemen that were recruited in the 2023 class that are going to have to take on a much bigger role because they'll have to take on a significant role, a meaningful role this season. Those guys will have another year. So Oregon's just really, really loading up right there. But let's flip to the offensive side and talk DeCorian Moore because I think wide receiver is maybe the biggest need for Oregon in the recruiting sense to just build depth for 2025. You've got Jeremiah McClellan and Ryan Pelham and, also Jack Ressler, who's not one of the higher rated recruits, but you never know, who's going to pop and how it all works in the 2024 cycle. Jurion Dickey, Kyler Casper, we'll see if those guys stick around for 2025. I think that might depend for one or both of them on how big their role is this year. But when you're losing your top 4 receivers after this season, and that's the expectation, that's a lot to replace in one offseason.
It certainly is. And I think a case can be made for safety being a pretty pressing need as well for Oregon this cycle. I put a story out recently on Ducks Digest where I ranked kind of the needs by position group in 25. So maybe give that one a read if you haven't already. But DeCorian Moore, man, the 5-star wideout out of Duncanville, number 1 at his position in the entire country. A truly, truly special talent. I got to see him in person once during the 7-on-7 circuit last year. And he was another one of those big visitors that the Ducks were able to get, one of 2 top 10 guys nationally that visited Oregon in the recent months here, along with DJ Pickett, a 5-star DB out of Tampa, Florida. So he's another name to watch here. But DeCorian Moore committed to LSU, and Oregon has really, really stayed involved in this one behind the scenes ever since his commitment. Seems like he's probably going to get back out on the trail once things kick off with the dead period coming to a close, I believe at the start of next week, depending on when this episode comes out. March 4th or 5th, I think, is the popular visit date that we're seeing with guys. So after I spoke with DeCorian Moore after his most recent visit to Oregon, and man, it's really hard to get a read on some of these top tier guys sometimes. But I mean, if he were to go to a school other than LSU, I think Oregon would have to be firmly in that conversation of top flip contenders. I think that they have a really good chance given what they've done at the position. They're about to send another guy to the NFL and Troy Franklin. Given, LSU has a much more decorated history at the position with Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Odell Beckham. But man, I think that the Ducks have done a really good job staying involved here, and I give them as good a chance as anybody else to flip him. But got to see what Texas does. They don't let the top players from in-state get too far, and I would probably think that Texas A&M tries to get involved as well. But those are kind of my thoughts on DeCorian Moore. I think that Junior Adams and the Ducks still very much alive.
Yeah, and it's an interesting conversation when you talk about kind of position identity for a school. Ohio State's wide receiver U, Washington for a little while was DBU, and that of course is Oregon now since the Ducks have Jabbar Muhammad. But you just look at that's exactly how it works. But I don't know that Oregon has that specific identity. Like their big draft picks in the last decade or so, Justin Herbert, quarterback, Penei Sewell, offensive tackle, Kayvon Thibodeau, defensive line, DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead, defensive line. Deion Jordan was a first-round pick, but Gonzo in the first round at corner. Like they've been very varied.
Broad?
Yeah, broad is the better word because it doesn't sound as weird as saying very varied. Nice job, Spencer. But I think that it's something that definitely helps when you see someone at that position go on from a school, because look at what's happened to Ohio State. They keep churning these guys out because it's a brand, because it's an identity, and that clearly resonates at some level with recruits. It doesn't mean you can't get big-time players at that position at other schools, but to say that it doesn't play a factor, like Troy Franklin's going to be the highest drafted Oregon wide receiver in my lifetime. I don't think it's going to be even close. Like he could be end of first round, maybe early to middle of the second. Either way, he's going to be off the board in the first 2 rounds, and the best Oregon receivers have not sniffed have not even sniffed the first couple rounds. I think Evan Stewart could be the next guy to get into that particular discussion. Speaking of discussions, we're going to have one about defensive line because I talked about this on yesterday's show, but I want the thoughts of a one Maxwell Torres. I want your thoughts. I already know what your thoughts are going to be on FanDuel. Is it America's number one sports book in your view? Because it's America's number one sports book in everybody else's view, and you can get buckets over there right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Look, I've been talking for weeks here on the show. Easiest $5 that you'll make or in this instance, $150 in bonus bets with a $5 bet is just picking the Blazers to lose. Like there's no safer bet than just picking Blazers anti-money line there on the other side. And if your bet wins, it's $150. Any winning $5 bet, no matter what it is or what the odds are. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. Oregon's got totals up there for their win total. They've got odds up there for their Big Ten championship, national championship, Heisman odds for Dylan Gabriel, anything you want. It's all over there. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So, Max, this has been an ongoing discussion kind of here a little bit on the show. And I wanted your thoughts as we dive into the mailbag to end today's show. As always, YouTube comments or X, formerly known as Twitter, at @McLaughlinCFB or at LockedOnDucks. DMs and mentions always wide open. If you want priority access, you can talk with me one-on-one and get all sorts of other perks. Go join the flock over at Subtext. So we talked about a question that I got from Robin earlier in the show about Oregon and their top 5 recruiting class, but this came in from Dr. Classic MD. He's official. He's got MD in his name. Just listen to today's show. I like that you spoke about the interior D-line. It's one of my biggest question marks of the offseason. You mentioned you expect Aiden Breland to have some kind of role, but what about Elijah Rushing and Jericho Johnson? Jericho looked almost ridiculously huge in the All-American game. So what do you think his offseason goals are? Lose weight, maintain weight, gain weight? I don't know that gaining weight would be the play for him. And do you see any of the incoming freshman edges having a similar role as Mateo had in 2023? I want to think that Elijah will see 5 or more snaps a game, but haven't heard much confirming that. So on the rushing front, I think spring football is going to tell us a lot. That's what Dan Lanning said on the recruiting show on the Oregon Sports Network, that the amount that true freshmen play will be dependent upon how much work they put in, how ready they are, how quickly they can get their bodies acclimated there. I think rushing is the most talented and ready of the defensive linemen, but he's got a lot of guys in front of him. Jericho Johnson does not. But I want your thoughts here, Max. My assessment of Jericho Johnson is, massive guy, huge presence. Jordan Scott is my comparison for him for past Oregon players, but I don't know that he's someone that can step in and play as a true freshman. I think he's the perfect example of someone who needs a year to get his body into college shape.
This crop of D linemen that the Ducks signed in 24 is really exciting. There's no doubt about that. I think to start off with rushing, I think he has a unique opportunity and he's kind of in a cool spot because Oregon was very fortunate and obviously they planned it to go this way, but the fact that those 3 freshmen played as much as they did right away is really good because it means that they're good. And I think it also gives them some flexibility as far as working some of these other guys in. I think Amarion Winston is a guy who maybe doesn't get enough discussion at that position. He's still pretty young. I think he signed with the Ducks in 22. So, the younger brother of Lamar Winston, former Duck. I think he's a guy to keep an eye on. Obviously, Jordan Birch is the discussion there. So because you already have some really good pieces at that position, Elijah Rushing doesn't get to Eugene with, hey, man, sorry you just got here, but we really need you to see the field right away. They're going to be able to kind of ease him in a little bit more. I think that even though he was a highly rated guy, it is going to be a relatively significant jump in competition just because Arizona isn't one of those powerhouse states. Not slighting him at all. I'm just saying I feel like I'm a little bit mixed on Arizona. They put out some pretty good guys. Obviously, some of those have come to Oregon.
I feel like they're a state that's been on the ascension in the last couple of years, but they're not starting from a base the way that California is. But Arizona and Washington are the 2 states that in the last 5 years have really taken off in producing blue chip college football talent.
No doubt, no doubt. I think Utah and Missouri are other intriguing ones as well that Oregon has stayed involved in. But
Mm-hmm.
I think rushing will definitely have some kind of a role as a true freshman. I don't know if it'll be as big as Mateo's. And I wasn't expecting Mateo's to be quite that big, to be honest. So we'll have to see with him. He's got the size, he's got the athleticism and twitch, but he's someone to watch for sure. And then looking on the interior, I think that Oregon has a good little base there right now with guys like Keon Ware-Hudson coming back, and then you bring in Jamari Caldwell from Houston, obviously. So those will probably be your main guys as of right now. But then, hey, how about those behemoths that they signed in 23 that we probably didn't hear? We didn't hear them a whole lot about. I think Amari Washington and Michael Gardner are the two that I really want to focus on. That could take that leap from year one to year two. I want to say both of those guys redshirted, but I don't know off the top of my head. I feel like some guys kind of snuck in there in some games that I didn't quite catch. So keep an eye on those guys. I think that Amari Washington in particular is just a really, really athletic guy. Also, both of those guys came out of Arizona. So I hope I didn't, dissuade anybody from Arizona, but I'm very intrigued by that state. And then as far as the 24 guys that they brought in, I think Jericho might be the heaviest guy that they signed since Faope first got to Oregon. I want to say that he was like north of 370 or something when I first heard about him. I could be wrong, but I remember he was massive.
No, I heard that from someone as well, that he was listed around like 340, 350, but he was actually around like 370 or so. I don't know if he slimmed down since then.
Has. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think you can play college football at the Power 5 level at 370. Like that's a lot.
Yeah. So I think, when you're looking at these guys, you obviously want to talk about Aiden Breland because he comes from modern day. You obviously want to talk about Jericho because he was an All-American as well. There was a time, Spencer, when I thought it was going to be one or the other. And what do you know? They got both, which is super special. And then maybe we got to talk about Tion Gray coming out of Missouri as well. I mean, those are three guys that all come to Eugene with college-ready frames, more or less. So I think that we could see some of those guys carve out roles. I wouldn't be surprised if they're at least in the two deep. And I think with defensive line, it's an interesting position because we haven't necessarily seen a ton of guys play right away when they get to Oregon. You look at some of the big names that they signed last year with like Terrence Green, Jaden Moore, Ashton Porter. Like those are all guys that have been, I think I said with you, marinating in the meantime in their first year behind those stacked group of veterans that they had last year. So D-line is going to be, I think it's one of the bigger question marks right now, but it's one that you're more excited about than like, oh, what are we going to do here?
I agree with you there that it's a question, but it's like, oh my gosh, which of these guys is going to be good? Someone is going to pop. There's too much talent in that room that goes 8 to 10 deep for there to not be someone who shows up in 2024 and you look at it and go, oh, that guy's going to be a starter for the next 2 or 3 seasons, and he's going to be an all-conference guy in at least one of those seasons as well. So I think the defensive line's more than a little fascinating. You mentioned Michael Gardner and Amari Washington. Someone who I brought up when this question arose on yesterday's show was Ashton Porter, because he's someone who I think has the potential to play inside and out the way that Brandon Dorlus did. And the word on him when he was, committing to Oregon was that he had one of the highest floors of the entire group, right? Ceiling, maybe not quite as high because he didn't have, certain explosive traits, at least early in his college career, late in his high school career. But I'm interested to see all of those names. And the first spring practice, by the way, is March 14th. March 14th is the first spring practice. That's less than 2 weeks away. And I doubt we'll get it too deep at that point in time, but certainly we'll at least start to get a little peek behind the curtain.
Yeah, and I think that just a cool little note on Ashton Porter. I remember during his recruitment, I talked to somebody around the program in Eugene, and they were saying, no one else. Like he was previously committed to Northwestern. For people who didn't know that, fun fact. But when he kind of landed on Oregon's radar, the person I was talking to was kind of surprised that more big time schools weren't involved with him. And then I remember Johnny Bowens, a former Texas A&M commit. He's on the roster too, and I think that they're really excited about his upside. It's just a matter of how quickly did he adapt to the speed of the game and, grasping the playbook and everything. I feel like Oregon does have one of the more, like, at least from the notes I've been able to glean in the general conversations, I think they have a relatively complicated playbook, at least as it goes on defense. So it's not something that's super easy to grasp. That's why it's so important and so great that they have veterans like Jeffrey Bassa and Justin Jacobs coming back to kind of, be the generals of that defense. So super excited about the defensive linemen. Can't wait to see what they have in store for spring football.
I'll dive more into this next week, but wanted to just wrap with this question because it came in from Blaine about special teams and the return game. And just, really quick, Max, your thoughts. I've talked on this show before about Oregon's return game last year wasn't good. They didn't have a single kick return over 25 yards. They only had one punt return over 20. The kick return is the most troubling. Who stands out to you for 2024 as an early snapshot of, hey, this guy could be a really, really good returner and change that part of the game?
A bunch of names kind of just came to mind, which is a good problem to have if you're Oregon. The first one is Gary Bryant. I think that was kind of something that really was talked about as far as his value when he entered the portal from USC. And I think it would have been cool to see him a little bit more involved with that last year.
Well, he was pretty involved in the kick return game last year.
Do better.
I wasn't that impressed with him. In the return game, I think he's got more to unlock on the receiving front. But in the return game, I don't know. I'm just looking for some new blood there in the kick return.
Sure. Well, then I think other names that are maybe worth a mention. I think Tez Johnson's worth a mention. Maybe Noah Whittington and his return. I think he's one of the fastest players on the team. How about Evan Stewart from Texas A&M? Crazy speed and twitch there, and maybe Rod Pleasant too. I think even if he doesn't carve out a more significant role on defense as a corner, just get the ball in that guy's hands because he can absolutely fly.
Yeah, I would love to see somebody like a Rod Pleasant step up and see more action on the return side next year, just because Oregon didn't have a special teams return touchdown that last year, and that's not normal. You want to have a couple of those a season, help the offense out any way that you can. Max Torres, Ducks Digest, Ducks Dish Podcast, Fan Nation, and Sports Illustrated. Thanks as always, man.
Thanks for having me on, Spencer. Appreciate it.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend, and go Ducks.